The cemetery rested beneath a low, unmoving sky, the kind that pressed down on the earth and made even the richest marble seem dull. Victor Hale stepped out of his car and closed the door quietly, as if noise itself were disrespectful here. He adjusted his coat, though it was already perfectly arranged, and followed the familiar path of pale stones toward the back corner of the grounds. His shoes never touched dirt, the caretaker made sure of that. Everything here was orderly, controlled, unlike the chaos that lived inside him. Ethan's grave sat beneath an old oak tree whose branches never seemed to bloom properly. Victor had once thought it fitting. His son had always loved flawed things, crooked smiles, broken people, second chances. Victor had never understood that about him, not fully. Even now, years later, it felt like a language he'd never bothered to learn until it was too late. He stopped in front of the black granite headstone, running his eyes over the carved letters he could recite in his sleep. The dates were wrong. They were always wrong. A parent should never outlive a child, yet here he was, still breathing, still wealthy, still haunted. Victor placed a bouquet of white lilies at the base of the stone. He didn't like flowers, but Ethan had. He stood there, hands clasped behind his back, jaw tight, rehearsing words he would never say aloud. Apologies came too easily now, but they had been absent when they might have mattered. He was about to turn away when the sound reached him, soft, uneven, almost swallowed by the stillness. At first, he thought it was the wind brushing through the leaves. Then it came again, sharper this time. A sob. Victor stiffened. This cemetery was private. Security ensured that. He glanced around, irritation rising, then followed the sound between two rows of headstones. His annoyance faded with every step, replaced by confusion, then something close to disbelief. A child knelt at Ethan's grave. She was small, painfully so, bundled in clothes that didn't belong together, an oversized jacket with a broken zipper, leggings worn thin at the knees, socks peeking out unevenly above scuffed shoes that clearly came from different pairs. Her dark hair fell in tangled strands around her face as she bowed her head, shoulders shaking with quiet cries. For a moment, Victor simply watched. The image felt wrong, like a tear in reality. Children didn't belong in places like this, not alone, not like this. He cleared his throat softly. "Hey," he said, keeping his distance. "You shouldn't be here by yourself." The girl startled, spinning around so fast she nearly lost her balance. Fear flashed across her face, raw and instinctive. Her hands came up defensively, clutching a single wilted dandelion she'd been holding like a treasure. "I'm sorry," she whispered quickly, words tumbling over each other. "I didn't mean to. I'll go. I was just..." She stopped mid-sentence, eyes drifting back to the headstone. Her lips trembled. Victor frowned. "Who are you?" he asked more gently. "Where's your family?" She shook her head, curls bouncing. "I don't have one." The answer landed heavier than he expected. He glanced again at Ethan's name carved in stone, then back at the child. "You know whose grave this is?" he asked. She nodded. Ethan, hearing the name from her mouth, sent a sharp jolt through his chest. "How do you know that?" he asked, suspicion creeping into his voice despite himself. She pointed at the stone, almost shyly. "It's written there. And, I know." Victor exhaled through his nose. "That's not what I meant." The girl turned back to the grave and carefully placed the dandelion at its base, smoothing the dirt around it with care that felt practiced. "He liked yellow," she said softly. "He said it makes sad places look less lonely." Victor froze. The words were too specific. Too familiar. Ethan had said something like that once, standing in their kitchen, laughing at his own sentimentality while Victor had pretended not to listen. "Who told you that?" Victor asked. She shrugged slightly, as if the answer were obvious. "He did." The air seemed to thin. Victor's heartbeat thudded loudly in his ears. "My son is dead," he said slowly, carefully. "He's been dead for 3 years." "I know," she replied. Her voice cracked, but she didn't look away. "That's why I come here. So he won't be alone." Victor felt anger spark, sharp and protective. "You shouldn't say things like that," he snapped. "This isn't a game." Her eyes filled with tears, but she stood her ground. "I'm not playing," she whispered. "I promise." Silence stretched between them, heavy with unsaid things. Victor noticed how thin her wrists were, how her hands trembled even when she tried to keep them still. He softened his tone. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lily." "And how old are you, Lily?" She held up 7 fingers, then hesitated and lowered one. 6, I think. That answer hurt more than any accusation could have. Victor ran a hand through his hair. "Lily, he said, choosing his words carefully, how did you know my son? She hugged herself, shoulders hunching as if bracing for rejection. Her voice came out small but steady. Because he talked to me, she said. He listened. And because he was my dad. The world tilted. Victor stared at her, disbelief crashing into him like a wave. That's not possible, he said flatly. Ethan never. He stopped. Never told me, he almost said. The words tasted bitter. Lily didn't argue. She just looked at him, eyes shining with tears she refused to let fall. He said you wouldn't know yet, she murmured. He said you were busy. Victor felt something crack deep in his chest, a soundless fracture that spread through him. Busy. That had always been his excuse. He looked at the grave again, at his son's name, at the little flower trembling beside the stone. The certainty he'd carried into the cemetery that morning began to unravel, thread by thread. Why are you here today? Victor asked quietly. Lily sniffed. It's his birthday, she said. He liked it when people remembered. Victor's breath caught. He had known the date, of course. He always did, but he had forgotten the meaning behind it. As Lily knelt again beside the grave, whispering words meant only for the dead, Victor remained standing, rooted to the spot, realizing with growing dread that the life he thought he understood, his son's life, had been far larger, and far more secret, than he had ever imagined. Victor's first reaction was laughter, sharp and hollow, the kind that burst out when the mind refused to accept what the ears had heard. It echoed too loudly in the quiet cemetery, and he immediately hated the sound of it. That's impossible, he said, shaking his head as if that alone could undo her words. My son would have told me. Lily flinched, not at the volume but at the certainty in his voice. She looked down at her shoes, nudging a loose pebble with the toe of one foot. He wanted to, she said softly. He just didn't know how. Victor crossed his arms, more to steady himself than to appear firm. And you expect me to believe that Ethan had a child he never mentioned? That he just left you? Lily's chin trembled. He didn't leave me, she insisted. He got sick. The word hit Victor like a blow. Sick. That was the story he knew. The hospital. The slow decline. The late-night phone calls he'd ignored because of meetings that felt urgent at the time. Lily reached into the deep pocket of her oversized jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, creased so many times it was soft as cloth. She hesitated, then held it out toward him with both hands, as if offering something sacred. He gave me this, she said. So I wouldn't forget. Victor stared at the paper for a long second before taking it. His fingers felt clumsy, incooperative. Carefully, he unfolded it. A child's drawing filled the page. Crude lines, bright colors. A man with brown hair and a crooked smile, drawn taller than everyone else. A little girl beside him, their hands joined. Above them, written in uneven letters, were the words me and Daddy Ethan. The world seemed to narrow to that single piece of paper. Victor's chest tightened, breath catching painfully in his throat. Where did you get this? He whispered. At the park, Lily replied. He used to meet us there after work. He'd bring bread for the ducks and let me throw it, even though my mom said it made them spoiled. Victor swallowed hard. Ethan had loved feeding ducks as a boy. Victor had always complained about the mess. You're saying, your mother? Victor began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. She was staying at the shelter, Lily said. She was sick too, but not like Ethan. He helped her get medicine. He helped me with my letters. Victor sank onto the stone bench beside the grave, the strength draining from his legs. The image forming in his mind was painfully clear now. His son, quiet and kind, living an entire life Victor had never seen. Did he know? Victor asked, his voice barely audible. Did Ethan know you were his child? Lily nodded without hesitation. Yes. He told me I was his miracle. He said I came when he was scared, and that made me special. Victor closed his eyes. Ethan had called many things miracles, usually with a laugh, but there was no mistaking the sincerity Lily described. My mother died last winter, Lily continued, words spilling out now as if she feared she might lose her chance. We were in a cold room. Ethan promised he'd come back for us when he got better. But he didn't. I waited. The guilt Victor had carried for years suddenly shifted, deepened, sharpened. Ethan hadn't just been fighting his illness. He'd been fighting to leave something good behind. Where have you been living? Victor asked, forcing himself to stay present. Lily shrugged. Sometimes the shelter. Sometimes the bus station. Sometimes wherever it's warm. Each answer felt like another accusation, even though Lily's tone held no blame. Victor pressed his palm against his eyes, breathing through the ache in his chest. Why didn't anyone tell me? He whispered, more to himself than to her. He said you were busy, Lily repeated. And that you didn't like surprises. A bitter smile tugged at Victor's mouth. He had always liked control, not surprises. Ethan had known that. Victor looked at Lily again, really looked at her. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her smile when it flickered briefly, it was impossible to deny the resemblance now that he allowed himself to see it. I failed him, Victor said hoarsely. I failed both of you. Lily stepped closer, hesitant. He didn't think so, she said. He said you were just scared. Victor laughed quietly, the sound breaking into something close to a sob. He was always too forgiving. The wind stirred the branches above them, scattering a few dry leaves across the grave. Lily crouched and brushed them away with careful hands, the way Ethan once had. Victor stood slowly and held out his hand. Come here, he said. She hesitated, then placed her small hand in his. Her fingers were cold. You don't have to be alone anymore, Victor said, voice steady despite the storm inside him. I don't know how to fix what's been broken, but I can start now. Lily looked up at him, searching his face. You won't send me away. No, he said firmly. I won't. Her shoulders sagged with relief, a weight lifting that no child should ever have carried. She squeezed his hand like she was afraid he might disappear. As they walked toward the exit, Victor glanced back at the grave one last time. The dandelion Lily had placed there stood out against the dark stone, bright and defiant. I'll take care of her, he said silently. I promise. For the first time since Ethan's death, Victor felt something other than grief take root in his chest. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was purpose.